Ladies and gentlemen, this is a Black History Month special. My name is Ebro Darden. You can check me out on Ebro in the morning. Shout to all the family and friends tuned in, all our communities, our BLS family and our Hot 97 family. This is all being brought to you by Boost Mobile today. And we're calling this Vaccine 101. Your questions, your concerns, answered by Dr. Fauci and, wait for it, Kizzmekia. She won't let me call her Dr. Kizzy, even though that's her Twitter, Dr. Kizzy, PhD. We may start calling Dr. Fauci Tony. You know, it might get real casual here, but it's great to see you guys today. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you.
Good morning.
Good morning. So this is a remarkable moment in history. Kizzmekia, I'd like to start with you. You know, there's a lot of fear in the Black and brown communities around vaccines, and we've talked about it. We've seen studies on it. Dr. Fauci, I've had the pleasure of talking to you about it. And it, you know, it goes back to Black people being involuntarily used in testing and studies and things throughout our history in the world, and specifically in North America. But here we are, Black History Month. And you, Dr. Kizzmekia, are one of the leaders on developing the vaccine that's being rolled out to communities everywhere. I would love to hear from you on how monumental this is, and also maybe get some insight from you how families should be digesting the reality of this vaccine.
You know, I actually have been so focused on the work that I don't think that I really have fully grasped how monumental this moment is. And it's not just for me, it's for everybody that is involved. I think that my space on the team and the work that we've been doing for several years, having the visibility as a Black woman is extremely helpful, particularly around the issues that you talk about, the hesitancy in the Black community around vaccines, and really trying to, at least as much as I can, to kind of break some ground or lay some bricks, as I like to say, to try to regain some of the trust and prove our trustworthiness. And then also our tenderness. I think that one of the things that is missing from the story is just how much, you know, Dr. Fauci and my boss, Dr. Barney Graham, like just genuinely care about people because they, you know, are suited up or whatever sometimes. And so that's kind of lost. But I think that I can easily translate that because I've known both of them since I was 19 years old. And they've been great and instrumental in my career, but also in the science. And I've seen so many different projects under the NIAID go from point A to point Z in this way. And I think that, you know, wrapping our families and our communities' heads around this vaccine is something that is stepwise. I think that it's important to understand that there is the hesitancy based on the history, and then there are hesitancies that are based on just lack of information. And so you have to tackle those things in different directions. And so the way that I generally do it is targeted in that I ask people why. You know, the girl who did my put my wig on yesterday, she said she was not going to get it. She's like, I just don't understand it so fast. And I could just break that down to her very specifically. And I think that if we take that kind of approach rather than a really widespread, broad approach, we'll get there eventually, because she's just going to go tell someone else the story that I told about the development. And as much as we can, the good will spread around just as much as misinformation.
Kizzmekia, I actually learned from your Twitter feed when the vaccine came out about the kind of nuances of this quote unquote warp speed, rush to market, you know, misnomer about the vaccine. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Fauci, what we know about the vaccine today, or what I read was the delivery mechanism of the vaccine, which is something that's being been being worked on since SARS. Is that correct?
When you say the delivery mechanism, Ebro, what are you referring to?
Meaning giving the patients a protein instead of giving them the virus. Did I read that correctly?
Yeah. You know what it is? Kizzmekia referred to it when she was talking about working on this in years. It really is, and I'll try to simplify it, but it's a beautiful story of the evolution of science over a period of time where you apply what you've learned in one particular area, you apply it to another, and you really advance the field. You know, where Kizzmekia works is called the Vaccine Research Center, and they work on vaccines for a number of different diseases. One of them is HIV. And one of the things about HIV, which is really very problematic getting a vaccine because of the special nature of that virus, but one of the aspects of it employs the discipline called structure-based vaccine design or structural biology, where you get the right form or conformation of a particular molecule to be the optimum way to get the body to respond. And they were working on that with HIV. And then Dr. Graham, who is the senior person that works with Kizzmekia, what Barney and Kizzmekia and the team decided to do is, you know, why not get this approach towards getting the right conformation of a molecule to see if it works for other disease? And actually, Dr. Graham was more interested in respiratory syncytial virus, which is one of the reasons why I actually hired him many, many years ago, because he had been interested in that. And he got that special way of getting the right conformation of a molecule and stabilizing it by giving certain mutations in it. And it worked incredibly well, a major breakthrough in respiratory syncytial virus that people did not pay much of attention to because it doesn't have the visibility that HIV or that COVID had. And then when we started to develop the coronaviruses, SARS and MERS, they began to apply that technology of stabilizing the best form of the molecule to use for a vaccine. They did it for MERS. And then when COVID came and SARS-CoV-2, Kizzmekia and Barney did it for SARS-CoV-2. And they got this molecule stabilized in just the right conformation to make it extremely effective in stimulating the right kind of immune response. So that's what Kizzmekia was talking about. It didn't start last year. It started years ago when Barney and Kizzmekia were working on this type of an approach, which finally got to fruition with COVID-19, which is a spectacularly successful vaccine.
And so for clarity for the audience, the only thing here that's been expedited is the actual to market portion, not the actual science, but the actual period in which we can get it administered.
Right. So we went from knowing what this new virus was. The Chinese, when they identified it, they put it on the genetic sequence, they put it on a public database. And what Barney and Kizzmekia did was take that information and essentially plug it into the system that they had been working on for years. So when we went from the sequence of that virus to actually getting a vaccine that you could put into people's arms, it took less than a year. And some people would say, oh my God, you rushed it. You must have been reckless in rushing it. There was nothing reckless about it. It was the culmination of years of scientific work that made it occur so quickly and so efficiently.
And from our last conversation, Dr. Fauci, should I interpret that our lack of diplomacy with China created a lack of communication to where there was, 90 to 120 days where the Chinese were not being communicative as well as we would like it to be because of who our leadership was at the time?
You know, Ebro, I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. I think the Chinese, probably regardless of who is leading our country, I mean, having bad diplomacy doesn't help for sure. But over many years, when they're dealing with new infectious diseases that emanate out of China, there has been variable degrees of lack of transparency. And this is not something new. This is something that hopefully will change. And when we realize as we get together in a more broad global sense that we won't have that lack of transparency. But I think that they would have not been transparent regardless of who was leading the country.
What information can you give to people right now with regard to the rollout of the vaccinations in New York? We were dealing with a shortage a few weeks ago, and people are expecting more. What information can you disseminate to people other than just be patient with regard to getting the vaccine and making sure that their families are taken care of?
You know, that was exactly what I was going to say, is that you have to be patient. Understanding that there are over 300 million people in this country to vaccinate. And there are currently 2 companies trying to fulfill the need of that through what is considered to be an emergency use authorization. And so manufacturing of these vaccines takes time, but we will get there. The companies have promised the doses that they plan to distribute, and they promised hopefully they can deliver on those promises, but we will eventually get there. In this initial stages, yes, there will be shortages. I'm actually fairly happy to see that some states are using the vaccine doses that they are allocated, because I recently visited a hospital in Chicago with Reverend Jesse Jackson, and that particular hospital had 900 doses that they got, and they had only been able to administer 300 because of hesitancy. And so there is something on the positive end of that, in that the doses that are allocated are being used. And so that's a good thing. But otherwise, as far as getting your dose, I tell people 2 things. I say, you be patient. And then also, if you've made that informed choice to be vaccinated, to be proactive about knowing when and where to go when it's your turn, because that's the thing, right? When it's your turn, you don't want to miss it.
Right.
And so that's the most important thing.
Okay, so really quick before we get to some questions from the audience and some questions from that we've put together as a team here. Immune system 101, because I don't really think that everyone understands how their immune system keeps them safe. Literally every single day, your body is interacting with bacteria and bugs, and your immune system is going, oh, we know how to beat that. We know how to beat this. Okay, no problem. Get this guy out of here. And that's happening nonstop, right? But now this COVID thing comes along, and human bodies had never seen it before. And so there was some problematic immune system responses that was causing people who didn't have the proper immune system, or, other health issues. They weren't making it across the finish line. They were dying. And there was a lot of people who lost people and families. My brother was literally, we were day to day, with him for several weeks. But understanding this vaccine is the vaccine, we're getting a protein from the DNA of the virus, correct?
You're getting what's called messenger RNA. Okay. So it is, what it does is it sends a message to your cells to make a particular protein, which is called the spike protein that's from the virus. So you're not getting any other thing from the virus except for one protein. And I've heard it being described like a Snapchat message, and I think that's probably the best description. So imagine your cells getting a Snapchat message with the spike protein, and for several hours to a day, couple days, it's reading that message and making that protein, and then your body says, as it's trained to do, well, we have this foreign protein over here on these cells. Let's go over there. Let's see what it looks like, and so your body learns what that protein looks like. And then so your body can create a very, very, very specific, on like the atomic level, immune response to it.
And that immune response, now your body has basically, let's call it muscle memory, if you will. So if you come in contact with the COVID virus, your body now goes, oh, we've already learned this. We can beat it.
Right.
Absolutely. Sees it from a mile away.
Right. And the important thing, Ebro, is that people sometimes think when you get vaccinated with the whole virus, and that could hurt you or get you infected. It isn't. It's a very, very specific part of the virus, a very specific protein that you call a spike protein. And that messenger RNA that goes in there is the signal to make that protein. So nowhere in that process does the vaccine expose you to the actual virus, only to a very specific part of the virus. People need to understand that, because some people still think that you can get COVID-19 from the vaccine, and that would be impossible to happen.
So for my brother who has MS, and because of his MS drugs, his immune system's been suppressed. Well, literally, it wasn't functioning at all. So they had to give him the antibody plasma, so that his body, am I articulate? I think that's what they call it, right? Like a plasma with antibodies in it, so that his body would basically get antibodies from somewhere else, because he wasn't making any. And they did that twice. And now he's starting to get better. He had to have the tracheotomy so he could breathe, et cetera, et cetera. As a family, with a family member who basically the immune system is not working according to the way we're understanding it, how should we interpret this vaccine, and for my brother specifically getting the vaccine? And I'm sure there's people out there who have older people in their family or people with compromised immune systems. What does this vaccine mean? Or do we even have that information yet? Do we even know?
Well, we know historically that people who are immunosuppressed, such as with medications for underlying diseases like your brother, for a variety of reasons, people might have autoimmune diseases, they may have certain cancers in which they're getting drugs that generally suppress the immune system. Under those circumstances, when you have a virus that's a live attenuated virus, for example, like measles vaccine, what you want to do when you have a vaccine that's live and attenuated, you have to be very careful when you give, or you shouldn't even give, a vaccine like that to those people, because the live attenuated vaccine virus could begin to replicate and hurt you. But when you have a vaccine, such as the one we're talking about, where you're essentially giving a messenger RNA to code for a protein, there's no live virus there. So there's no safety problem with giving a vaccine to someone whose immune system is suppressed. The only thing you have to realize that it is likely that the response to the vaccine will not be as effective if the person had a normal immune system. So there's going to be variable degrees of suppression of your ability to make a good response to a vaccine. But we want to make sure that we don't then say anybody who has a compromised immune system should not get the COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 vaccine. That's not the case at all. You'd want to give it to them. They may not get the best possible response, but some response is better than no response.
And for clarity, when you say not the best response, you don't mean in sickness, you mean in protection.
In protection. They may not get the best protection, but some protection is better than no protection. That's
right. Okay, so this is a Vaccine 101. Your questions answered by Dr. Fauci and Kizzmekia, Dr. Kizzy, PhD, which is a tight name, by the way. I don't know why you won't just let us just, Dr. Kizzy.
You can call me Dr. Kizzy. Go right ahead.
All right, so let's start with some of the kind of overall basics that kind of people continue to ask. What are the differences between the vaccines? Is one better than another? And if I'm out getting a vaccine and they offer me one, but I see, rich elites getting another, should I be concerned?
These vaccines are very, very similar. The spike protein that Dr. Fauci or Tony, since it's Casual Saturday, described that we really understood a lot about prior to this pandemic, it's particularly around how to make it a really good vaccine. They're the same in both of the vaccines that are currently licensed for emergency use. So both the Pfizer and both the Moderna vaccines. There are some differences, like, for example, with the Pfizer vaccine, you're getting 30 micrograms of the vaccine. With Moderna, you're getting 100 micrograms. With Pfizer, you get 2 doses that are 3 weeks apart. And with Moderna, you'll get 2 doses that are 4 weeks apart. But when you take all of the things in totality, the protection at the end of the day, after your 2 doses, is neck and neck with 94, 95%. And so what I say to people is that the vaccine that comes to your front door, you take it, right? Because they have been both vetted so stringently by the FDA, and they both use similar technologies, and both of the companies are experts in things that they do. And so I think that you should take the vaccine that is available to you.
Right.
I, for one, if I would have gotten a call to take a Pfizer vaccine before I got a call to take a Moderna vaccine, I was one of the first people to open a vial of a Moderna vaccine by way of doing the experiments. I would have taken the Pfizer vaccine because this is where we are in the pandemic, where number one, doses are short. So it is a privilege almost and a blessing to even get one at this point. And then secondly, that the doses have to be used in order for us to get to a place where we can start to go about normalcy again. And so if you don't take your dose because you want another brand name, someone else will be happy. And so just don't miss that chance. It's like Gucci and Prada, right? Like they're both,
What I was gonna say as us pedestrian folks, right? So, we don't even understand what the business between different vaccines is. Why are there different vaccines and different companies? Why the variation? Why not just one vaccine? Why these?
That's a great question. Yeah. You never want to put all of your eggs in one basket when you're dealing with biologics like vaccines, for any of a number of reasons, that some may work, others may not. You need an overwhelmingly large supply. No one individual company would likely be able to supply vaccine that the entire world might need. So even though we and, Kizzmekia particularly was involved in the development of one that's really, really good, we are very enthusiastic about getting as many shots on goal, as we say, if you want to use a hockey analogy or a hockey metaphor, is that we want as many companies in there as possible because, you have multiple billions of people in the world that you're going to want to get a vaccine to. And some of the vaccines might be more suited to particular regions of the world. For example, when you're dealing with some of the developing nations, particularly in the South, some of the Southern African nations, some Asian nations, you might have a problem with you don't have a good cold chain capability. So you wouldn't be able to
tell me what that means.
Freezing requirements.
Cold. Okay, got it.
So you really want a wide variety. You don't want to just have all of your eggs in one basket. You want to really be flexible to be able to move around and get vaccine to people throughout the entire world.
Okay. The mask and the vaccine. Let me ask it this way, because I know the answer, because I was privileged enough to talk to Dr. Fauci about this. Once I get the vaccine, can I still carry and give other people the COVID-19 virus, even though it won't make me sick?
Are you asking me or asking Dr. Fauci again?
Whomever. Let's go with Kizzmekia. Let's go.
Potentially, yes. At this point, with the data that we have, the answer is yes. And so what would be the opposite of that? If I were to say no, what that would be called sterilizing immunity, which is an extremely, extremely high bar. And so Sure, maybe based on the animal experiments that we've done, particularly in the primate, it seems like you're carrying really little virus in your nose if you might be vaccinated based on the animal studies. So that does have implications towards transmission. But until we really get solid data around transmission, and beyond that, moreover, until we get to the point where there's a critical mass of people in the population that are vaccinated, so that we can so-called stop transmission by way of just having dead ends where the virus can no longer go. We do need to be diligent around not just wearing masks, but all things, including the fact that I'm not having a 35th birthday party, right. Like those kinds of things, right? And so I think, we just have to be diligent. I've been calling it on Twitter, just social responsibility. That's what
it is. That's what it is. And so just so we can clearly say it, if you get vaccinated, you still need to wear a mask.
For the current time, yes. And we will certainly get to the point where we will not have to wear a mask anymore eventually.
Right. There will be a time, Ebro, when we get so many people in the country vaccinated, whether that be 70 to 85% of the people vaccinated, that the level of virus in the community will be so low that the risk of getting infection and transmitting it would allow us to pull back a bit on the stringency of the public health requirements. But as Kizzmekia says, for the time being, given the fact that there's so much virus still circulating in the community, if you get vaccinated and when you get vaccinated, you still need to assume that there's a possibility that you could get infected, not get any symptoms, and still have virus in your nasopharynx. So therefore, you want to wear a mask to prevent you from spreading it to other people.
And then I guess we need to discuss travel and mandatory vaccinations. Has there been any dialogue or any conversation about how this vaccine thing is playing out over the long term for people going back to work, for people who want to travel to other nations? Look, when I go to Africa, when I go to Ghana, you're not showing up without a yellow fever vaccine. They're not even letting you in the country. So that's already a thing around the world, where there are certain countries that don't even allow you to come unless you have certain vaccinations. Will COVID-19 be one of those things, Dr. Fauci?
We're already seeing that in some respects, that there are countries, and that's going to evolve and change in the direction of more requirements. I would imagine that there are some countries that say, if you're going to visit my country, before you even get on the plane, I want a documentation that you have a negative COVID-19 test. Some even say, and then when the plane lands in wherever it is, you want to be quarantined and maybe get a second test. So that's already happening. But also there are other circumstances that likely will evolve, that if you look historically, apart from COVID-19, there are requirements for vaccinations. I mean, I'm a physician at the NIH. I still see patients at the NIH Clinical Center. If I don't get my flu shot every year, and if I don't have a documented vaccination against hepatitis B, I wouldn't be allowed to see patients. So this idea, this tradition of requirements under certain circumstances to be vaccinated has been going on for a very long period of time. So we would not be surprised if you see some similar type of requirements as we go on further, looking forward with COVID-19 and the vaccine for SARS-CoV-2.
In the entertainment world, let's switch to entertainment. We're seeing basketball, we're seeing some football. People are trying to do their best, but we work at radio stations, so concerts, people are like, what are we doing next year, people? Are we planning these concerts or what? We have the privilege of having one of the longest running hip hop concerts in the world and the largest, called Summer Jam. Dr. Fauci, in August, do you foresee us being outside and having a concert? What needs to happen for us to be there, and what would have to happen for us not to make it?
Ebro, are you getting Dr. Fauci to consult on whether or not you can start planning Summer Jam?
Yes, because I need to start locking in acts. I got to put a budget together. I got, you know what I mean? I got to start sending letters out and seeing, you know what I mean?
I got the undertone.
Yo, hey, Kizzy, listen, you got backstage passes, you know what I mean? Like whatever you need.
Well, the answer is it's going to depend on people listening to what we're all saying here today and getting vaccinated, because the more people that get vaccinated, the better control you're going to get of the outbreak. If things go the way I would hope they go, that by the time we get to the summer, the overwhelming majority of the people could be vaccinated. In other words, a real good rollout of multiple vaccines. You know, we already have 2 companies now, the Moderna and Pfizer. Very soon, within the next couple of weeks, we're going to learn a lot more about the Janssen or J&J, Johnson & Johnson vaccine. There's another one called Novavax that's up on the line, and an AZ, AstraZeneca. So if we get all of those up and running and we vaccinate a considerable proportion of the population and get the level of virus low, it is conceivable that in the summer you could have a concert. You may not have the capacity in the sense of crowding everybody next to each other. There may be some restrictions about the number of people you let in. But I would imagine that if we're fortunate enough to get people vaccinated to the level that I'm talking about, and the level of circulating virus in the community is low enough, I think things like concerts, baseball stadium having now spectators as opposed to what we had last season where there was no one there, I think gradually we will approach some form of normality.
How long will this vaccine be effective and is it, and maybe it's too early to tell is the answer, on the I call them the remixes, right? So we're already seeing the remixes roll out, right? So is the vaccine we have now working against these remixes, Kizzmekia?
You know, we don't know whether or not they're working against these remixes, which for everybody else are the variant strains that you're hearing about in the media. But what we do know is that the level of immune response by way of antibodies that these vaccines elicit is so robust, is so high, so high, that even if, for example, the antibodies that are binding to the spike protein, that's what your body is the immune response that your body has. Even if, for example, a couple spots on the spike protein become mutated, this protein is so huge that you should have antibodies that are going to pick up the slack in so many ways. And so, yeah, we would like to see that there would be less and less mutations. And the way to do that is to stop transmission. And so stay home and not let yourself be a host for the virus. But as yet, with the mutations that we see, we're very hopeful that we do have such a high level of immune response that we might still get some level of protection against those. Okay.
That was a question from Aunt Francis, so shout out to you. And this is from somebody, they're calling themselves Schoolwork on YouTube. What will happen if a large portion of the population decide not to take the vaccine?
I'll let Dr. Fauci answer that, because that is something that keeps me up at night.
Yeah, well, that relates to several of the questions that you just asked, Kizzmekia and I, Ebro, and that would be unfortunate, because then if a substantial proportion of the population does not get vaccinated, you're going to have a chronicity of virus in the community that will never get crushed down to the low enough level that it could ultimately essentially not be an issue of a public health concern. If you want to achieve herd immunity, we don't know the exact percentage of the population that needs to be vaccinated, but you can make some extrapolations from what we know about measles. You know, measles is one of the more contagious viruses that mankind has ever experienced. We have a vaccine that's highly efficacious. I mean, it's 98% or more effective. And the herd immunity requirement for measles is somewhere around 90%. Once you get into the 80s, you get into trouble. Given that SARS-CoV-2 is highly contagious, but not as much as measles, and the vaccine is really, really good, but not quite as good as the measles vaccine, then I would think the requirement would be somewhere between maybe 70 and 85% of the population would need to be vaccinated. That's I think, an intelligent estimate. It's not been documented and verified. We'd have to wait to see later on as the years go by what the real requirement is. But if that requirement is correct, if what you're suggesting comes true, namely that a substantial proportion of the people don't get vaccinated, then we're going to be in some trouble, because this thing is going to linger and linger and linger. So if you really want to crush it and really suppress it to a level that is not of any threat to us, you've got to get the overwhelming majority of the population vaccinated.
And is that including children? Where do children who may have had the virus, no symptoms, I've even this whole time I've been wearing a mask for the last year. But I was traveling late February last year in March, and was even kind of like, was I exposed? I don't know. I haven't felt anything. They didn't have antibody tests at the time. I've gotten several COVID tests. It's always been negative, but I haven't had any health anything in a year. Does this vaccination plan apply to people who may have had the virus and felt nothing, to children who haven't really been adversely affected? Like, how do we factor in the needs for those people?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's very clear that having been infected with SARS-CoV-2 does not mean that you should not get vaccinated. The policy is that you should be vaccinated whether or not you have been exposed/infected with it. So that's the policy. The other thing that you mentioned is that right now we don't have enough data to feel comfortable in giving it to children, but we will soon. And then we'll be able to extrapolate data that we got in the large clinical efficacy trials in adults. We're going to do what's called phase 1 and phase 2A studies in children, de-escalating age, going down from 18, 16, teenagers, adolescents, and then children, so that ultimately we get enough safety data so that we can freely give the vaccine to children. But that's going to take several months. We're not ready to do that now, only because we want to make sure, since children are a vulnerable population, you want to be quite confident that you're dealing with a vaccine that truly is safe and truly is effective in an adult normal population before you give it to a whole bunch of children.
And that's mostly because children are in a developmental stage of their life and their bodies are changing. What's the I guess, intelligence on understanding why you want to be extra careful with young bodies?
Well, you're right in saying that children, particularly very, very young children, have a developing immune system that's a little bit different. But it goes beyond that. It's the fact that children are vulnerable. They cannot give an informed consent. So you're going to be exposing them to something that you want to make sure extra special that you're dealing with safety. Mm-hmm. You don't want to deprive them for a longer period of time of the benefit of getting vaccinated. So you have to balance the concern for safety with the need for getting them vaccinated. And since children generally, with some exceptions, but generally do very, very well with this virus, in the sense of it's unusual, not impossible, but unusual for children to get serious involvement, relatively speaking, when you compare them to an adult.
I guess the last question I'm looking through audience questions here before I let you guys go. The last question would be, for the community out there that is questioning safety yet again, because I have these debates over and over and over with people about the vaccine, and I'll for the audience, I'll let you know, I'm 50-50 on the vaccine. I think that if you have a compromised immune system, if you're in group phase 1A and 1B, which is what's rolling out right now, you must get out there and get vaccinated for your own protection. Okay. For everyone else like myself, Dr. Kizzy, who hasn't had any problems, and for you, Dr. Fauci, you guys say that someone like me should definitely make sure I get vaccinated.
Right, because there is a likelihood, even if it, albeit low, but there's a likelihood that you could get COVID and get really sick. And unfortunately, people who are healthy and young and vibrant pass away from this virus. And so with a vaccine that's 94.5%, all, safe, as seen in the trial and beyond, there is, in my opinion, the risk analysis says that you should get your vaccine, Ebro, especially if you're planning to be at Summer Jam in August.
Yeah, no, seriously. Well, and honestly, it's going to play out probably that way because once again, and that's why I brought up my trips abroad, right? There are countries you can't go to without certain vaccines.
Well, here it is, Ebro. Also, I think that one of the things that I like to remind people about the informed choice to be vaccinated is that I think everything that you just said about yourself is true about yourself. But what about your neighbor who you might walk past in the street? Or like, what about your grandma who you want to go visit who might not have been able to get her vaccine? Or it's about community. From my perspective, the informed choice to get vaccinated is outside of yourself and around community service, especially at the point at which we are now where, we're in a pandemic and we need to really get this virus under control so that we can get back, not just to normalcy, but just sanity. And what the other options are, I think that when you not just step outside yourself, but also say, okay, well, I'm not going to get vaccinated because of this and this and that. And while I respect those choices, I think that a lot of times people don't look at what the other option is, which is you will forever be vulnerable to this virus. And that's something for me that's really deep to say out loud. And so I just want people to, number one, stay informed, because if you're watching this, that means that you are taking some onus over the information regarding your health in this vaccine. And then number two, to step outside of themselves and realize that this vaccination is probably going to prevent you 94% less chance of getting COVID disease. But beyond that, you are being one of those dead ends, so to speak, in the community around transmission. And that's almost more important.
Well, this has been Vaccine 101. And this is, ladies and gentlemen, we are making Black history right now. We are talking to the Black woman, and I'm sure there's other people of color on the team as well, who helped us get to this point with this vaccine.
Yes, we do diversity and inclusion. Okay.
Her name is Kizzmekia Corbett, and you can follow her on Twitter at Dr. Kizzy. And everybody knows listen, I gotta say, Tony, your vibes and energy are very different. These days up there at the White House, there's a lot more smiles and more giggles, less head rubbing and looking down. We can tell you've worked for a lot of presidents, so I don't want you to, get too far out of your square, but I'm sure things are much more positive these days.
Indeed.
He kept it short.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's great. Ladies and gentlemen, this conversation has been brought to you by Boost Mobile, and thank you guys for your time today, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Ebro.
Absolutely.
That was fun.
Take care.